So I know I've said for every single speaker that I'm particularly excited, but I am particularly excited for this speaker as well. Santiago Velasquez, which we've already met as our co-MC. So Santiago has been inspired by his vision impairment and his electrical engineering experience to make this world more inclusive. He is a Churchill Fellow, and he's the founder of two companies, EyeSyght and Hailo, which you can see at the back with one of the exhibitor booths, which aim to address accessibility issues in transport, navigation, business, education, and employment. So please welcome to the stage, Santiago.
So here's a question. How far can you go? Right? It sounds fairly simple. How far can you go today? How far can you go from here? What type of question is that? And before I answer that question, I'll ask you another question. If I were to make this presentation to you facing the wall, giving you my back, in regular circles that's inappropriate, right? Because I'm supposed to face you, I'm supposed to look at you and give you the acknowledgement that I'm paying attention to you. But does that really make sense when I can't see you? Does that make sense when a comment would be, hey, long time no see? Just kidding, I haven't seen you ever. Seems to be part of my repertoire. I was born in Colombia, and I was born with glaucoma, sclerocornea, and microphthalmia. Basically, for a lot of those in the room who do not know anything about the eye, like myself, it means I can see a little bit through my right eye, enough to see colors, shapes, and large objects, nothing through my left eye, and in order for me to stay out of trouble, I rely on this cute little guy, Trey. Every now and then he also gets me into trouble. I mention this because when I was born, I didn't know I was blind, and let me expand on that. I knew I couldn't see as much as the rest of my peers, but I didn't care. I didn't understand what that really meant. And when I was playing around, when I was going to school, I just did what I needed to do to get stuff done. I didn't care that I couldn't run as fast because of fear of tripping. I didn't care that I couldn't see the writings on the blackboard because the teacher would read things out. None of that mattered until I turned 7. And I remember very clearly this day because I made it home and I was very annoyed. This was after school. And my mum was asking me, why are you so upset? What happened today at school? And I said, oh, a guy just keeps calling me blind and 4 eyes and blind. And Mum very calmly said to me, sweetie, but you are blind. And I'm like, oh, well, I guess I am blind. I suppose that's true. And she said that so calmly that I said, I made it a point to say, I guess it doesn't really matter. I am blind. It's who I am. And every single day since that day, she always said to me, the only thing you cannot do is see. Everything else you can. And trust me, I have pushed that to the boundary and then some. If you were to bring my best friend up here, he says we have driven his car. I have driven a few cars actually. Gone scuba diving. I have done rock climbing. My latest adventure, and this is not as crazy really, but my latest thing was indoor skydiving, gearing up for the real thing. But the point that I'm trying to make here is I personally don't care that I can't see. Now, let's get back into my original question, which is how far can you go? If I were to blindfold you and I were to say, who would take up that challenge for a week, right? And you have to do everything that you do right now with a blindfold. Everything from make yourself breakfast, sort your clothes out, get to work, make sure that your work is good, make sure that the deliverables don't fall behind, make sure you go out and hang out with friends, make sure you travel. Who would take up that challenge? And previous experience has taught me that about 50% of people would be intrigued by it, and they would say, oh, I would be down. The other 40% is a bit hesitant, but they might do so because it's intriguing. And the last 10% will be freaking out and saying, oh, hell no, not a chance. I love that because it gives me the perspective that since this is the world that I know, of not being able to see details, not being able to understand what things look like until I touch them, I'm able to just say, it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter that you don't understand my world. I don't understand yours, right? If we lived in a world where nobody could see and only a few people could see, they would have a disability. I wouldn't. I would be set for life. I would be just old Andy. But the key thing that I'm trying to get to with how far can you go is it all depends on the barriers that are placed upon you, right? Right now, I could go as far as New York, as far as Berlin, assuming I have the financial means, because Trey is going to keep me out of trouble. If I get lost, I'm going to ask for help. My phone is going to help me out with navigation. And if worst comes to worst, I'll just bump into a wall and I'll just go the other way, right? It doesn't really matter. But I know that that's my experience. That's my experience because when I was born, I lived in a country where no supports existed, right? When I was going to school, there was no accessible material. It was all my mother was transcribing my Braille writing into print so the teachers could read it. And the computer that I was using was a computer that was paid for by my parents because the school didn't have the funds to do so. And footpaths, that's not really a thing. It's more of a, as long as you're not on the road, hopefully you don't get hit by a car type thing. But if you find a hole along the way, well, too bad, right? So when I made it to Australia, I didn't speak a word of English, and I didn't understand the concept of supports, right? I didn't understand that you could have a country where the school had the resources to give you access to Braille books. The school had the computers I needed to be able to do my work with the software that I needed. And it was odd because I thought, fantastic. I go from a country where they didn't have the resources, but they were willing to just sticky tape something together and hope for the best, to a country where we have all of the resources and, well, the world is my oyster. What I discovered was I was a burden to society, right? I became a burden to society when I made it to Australia because I wasn't born here. So the immigration department very quickly said, well, wait, hang on a minute, we need to pay for your upkeep because otherwise you're going to be a burden to society. And it was an odd concept to me because from a very young age I said, I want to study electrical engineering. I'm going to do that. I want to travel the world. I want to develop something cool. I want to learn about X, Y, Z. So hearing about being a burden, I thought, I don't understand. Like, where are you coming from? And this is where we get to how far can you go? When I finished my studies here, my high school, I said to my teachers, I'm doing this and I want to do electrical engineering after this. They said, but there is no way. You cannot do that. There's no precedent from anybody in the Southern Hemisphere to do so. How are you going to do that? My answer was very simple. I don't know. I don't know the content I'm learning, so how am I supposed to answer that question? When I made it to university, it was very exciting because I became an engineering challenge for my professors, my lecturers, tutors. How do we make sure that the content is accessible, right? And if any of you have worked with, or have heard of, software engineering, electronics engineering, you know that there are a lot of complexities just like there are in other fields. You have to write papers, you have to develop software, you have to develop hardware. It all takes time, it all takes a lot of effort. And this is how far I'm willing to go. I'm willing to go to university and realize that I'm not going to be able to pass this unit, a particular semester, because we don't have a template. We don't know how I'm going to develop a circuit board. As it turns out, rather than drawing it like the rest of the students, I can code it. But we also didn't know how I was going to analyze signals. How do you make sure that something that is represented using graphs and pretty pictures, how do you represent that in a way that made sense? And as it turns out, the way in which you do it is you print a piece of paper that allows you to feel what you're looking at. And all of these things were great, but I also realized that this is not sustainable. And this is where my companies come in, and this is where the work that I chose to do as a consequence of going to university, and I guess as a consequence of not caring about boundaries, how do you make information accessible, right? If somebody were to give me the option right now of having my sight back, I would very much say no, which sounds crazy, but I don't want to learn the alphabet from scratch. I don't want to learn how to drive as much as I love cars, because it means I would have to pay for rego, I would have to pay for petrol, I would have to find parking, and cars that are depreciating asset, which means that I would lose, $20,000 on a fancy car. Life is complicated, isn't it? Right now I get a chauffeur, so it's great. What I'm trying to get at is, I wouldn't want my sight back, but I do want to participate in a world where everybody has the same access as the sighted population. So I decided to start two companies, one which it's Hailo, and we are at the back, and another one called EyeSyght. And EyeSyght started first, which is a display that, when you look at it, is like looking at the projector. Something is being displayed, it's normal, it shows you windows or whatever you're doing on your computer. But when you touch the surface of the glass, you can feel what you're looking at. And I started that because I was frustrated that at university, the content was coming so quickly that we couldn't print things fast enough, and if they changed my tactile diagrams, I was already falling behind. And the second company that I started is Hailo. And Hailo, again, began because of our frustration. I can't see buses, and when I stand at the bus stop sometimes, or more often than not, bus drivers sometimes think that I'm just hanging out with my dog and they don't need to stop. Which is problematic when you're trying to get to uni and you have a test, and if you fail it, well, it's not good. You guys know, everybody here knows that if you fail a test, it's a pretty bad deal. So Hailo, I said, let's make sure that drivers know that somebody's waiting for them and they know what type of assistance I need. So Hailo is a software company that at the moment we're trialing in Sydney, we're trialing in Queanbeyan and Canberra, and in Tweed Heads, where you can rock up to a bus stop, and in the future train stops and tram stops and ferry stops, and you don't have to hail the bus. For whatever reason, you can't move your arms, you can't see it, and you don't need to explain to the driver where you want to get off. You don't need to tell them, hey, I need this type of assistance. All is taken care of from your phone. And this is how far I'm willing to go, and what I'm trying to get across with this presentation is that the combination of research as well as lived experience is extremely important, because I wouldn't want to go and change who I am. I wouldn't want to get my vision back. I said the petrol and the registration for the car, but in all seriousness though, I wouldn't really know how to deal with the world, right? I know how to move around, I know how to talk to people, I know how to present, I know how to do, and I'm very comfortable with that. But I also know that I'm one person. There are people who have had vision in the past, who understand what's it like to have vision, and I understand that my world isn't theirs. So the combination of working with researchers like those of you who have spoken here, as well as people who have lived experience, is extremely important to make sure that when we develop something, it makes sense. I just had a very fun chat with Lauren before she came up and spoke, which was, we engineers love making up contraptions that we're excited about, but the rest of the world looks at us and say, no way, I'm not using that. When the bionic eye was being made, they put the electronics on a hat, And as an engineer, I'm like, oh, that makes so much sense. But if I was wearing this and I had a hat, it doesn't make sense. I'll leave you with this. I was born in a country where I couldn't really have much help. And as a result of that, I had to figure out everything that I needed to do to be able to succeed with the assistance of my family and friends. I made it to a country that has a lot of resources that all of us can take advantage of and can make the world our oyster. I'm here, I don't want to change, but take advantage of all of the research that exists out there to push the boundaries and break all the barriers that don't exist in front of you. Thank you very much.